Welcome back on this Sunday morning. Democrats padded their majority in the General Assembly on election night, and it was a good night for progressives. With us today are two of them. Josh Elliott, he's a state representative, and State Senator-elect Julie Kushner. We thank you both for being here with us in the program. And Representative Elliott, I'll begin with you. You guys, the progressive wing isn't exactly going to be a rubber stamp for Ned Lamont, correct?
No, I think there's a lot of places where we're going to be in agreement. I think with some of the major issues that activists and organizers like Julie, before she became elected, and people like myself were pushing ideas for a long time to popularize them for someone like Ned to run on and get elected. So some of those things that have been in the works for 6 or 8 years, those we're actually going to see final fulfillment on. But now the question is, what's the next wave of things that we want to do? And we don't really know where Ned's going to be on those things.
He has said that he wants to sit down with the unions and get some concessions. Your background is in unions, Senator-elect Kushner. How do you feel about that?
Well, I think, you know, the unions have historically been very involved in trying to help the state through its fiscal problems. And so there have been a lot of changes made over the years in their benefit packages. And I think they've done a lot to support our state, far, you know, and above what most people do to contribute to the state's welfare. So I think there has been a real involvement by the unions that represent the state employees for many years now. When you look forward, obviously, if there are things that can be done that will help gain more fiscal security, I'm sure people will be interested in doing that. What I don't think is fair for us to think that state employees should really take on a greater share of the state's problems, because they've already contributed a great deal.
Let's talk about some of the high-profile issues which will be coming up in the next session. And number one is tolls. And some of the newly elected Democrats want to see tolls for everybody. Ned Lamont has made a pledge that they will only be for trucks. Do you support that?
I support whatever the legislature ultimately comes up with. What I would say is that that was a campaign promise made by Ned Lamont only, that in the legislature, given that we have 151 personalities, knowing what the end result is going to be is really hard to say early on. What I would say is that there's issues with constitutionality with going just after trucks. We know that Rhode Island is undergoing some legal battles with this exact issue. And what I would say is that I want to make sure that anybody coming in through our state using our roads is paying in to use our system. Because right now, if you go to any other state around us, you're going to be paying these fees, which are really just user fees. And we're the only one who's letting people come through our roads and not using them. The important piece to me, as a member of the Progressive Caucus, is that we talk a lot about tax equity. We want to make sure that if you're in the middle class, or even if you're in the working poor, that you have a chance to actually get into the middle class, stay in the middle class, and that we're not being overly burdensome to you through our tax structure. So we're going to be looking at ways, no matter what we do, to make sure that people aren't unfairly burdened.
And Senator, you're against tolls.
I am.
And you're one of the few Democrats who are.
I know, and I think that I come from it from two perspectives. One, obviously, representing the 24th District, we're right there on the border of Connecticut and New York. And so one issue, clearly, people are concerned about being a border city and how much that will impact our residents. But really setting that aside, you have to understand Danbury was cut in half by I-84. And essentially, there is no way to get across town without getting on the highway. And so even small amounts would add up tremendously and really impact our residents. The streets surrounding the highway are not built for traffic as well, so you don't really have an alternative. And I think it really, that's why I think you see so much pushback from Danbury. I also agree with Josh when it comes to taxation issues, because really the middle class in our state has been squeezed. And I think we have to look at ways to relieve taxes on middle class people and working people in this state. And find other sources of revenue, because otherwise we're really just taxing the same old people the same old way. And I think that that's a huge problem. Now, I understand Ned is talking about restricting it to trucks only, but clearly people are concerned that once the apparatus has been built, then the next step would be taxing or tolling cars as well. So I think people are really concerned about that.
He's also said that they will look into legalizing marijuana. What's acceptable to you? And I know you have some different opinions on this. Let's begin with you, Representative Elliott.
So I always want our state to be leading on issues if we can be. Since we're not leading on this issue, and a number of states have already legalized before us, we are now in the position where we can look at what other states have done and some other pitfalls that we've seen in terms of the regulatory framework. I think the time has come. I think that over 50% of Americans having partaken before and given the abject failure of the war on drugs, it's time that we look at issues of addiction if we want to say that we're concerned about people having substance abuse issues, that we lead more toward the education aspects, and we lead more towards ensuring that people have mental health outlets. So what I would say is that what we're doing now in terms of keeping this drug well, it's not illegal because it's been decriminalized, but creating that stigma, we're actually still, implementing a black market, and we're allowing people to be a part of this market without paying into the system. If we have a regulatory framework, the way that we have for pharmaceuticals, the way that we have for alcohol, we could actually, look at what we're doing right, what we're doing wrong, if what we want to do, end of the day, is reduce rates.
And you have sort of a Republican view of marijuana. And
no, I wouldn't
some might say, because you're not for legalization, or you're
well, actually,
you're hesitant about it.
No, I'm not hesitant at all. I think it's something we clearly need to study and look at, and I believe we could even move quickly on that issue. I have the good fortune of having spent a lot of time in Colorado for many years. So I have seen what the legalization of recreational marijuana has done in that state, and I think actually I have not seen any negatives. I have not seen any changes in the community that I go to regularly. And, so I've got a real good idea that this can be beneficial. I think that the only thing I want to be careful about and be clear about is that we look at how do we move in that direction. Much like Josh said, there are other states that have done this we can learn from and take the best practices from. But I'm not opposed to it. I just want to make sure we do it right.
I want to add on to that too is some really important aspects of this is the way that the drug war has affected our black and brown brothers and sisters. And we want to make sure that we look at things like expungement of records. We want to look at things allowing minority communities to enter the marketplace, especially since they've been the ones that have been punished by making these drugs illegal. So we want to build in equity into creating a framework as much as we can, and that's going to be a priority for us as well.
Josh, Elliott, Julie Kushner, best of luck in the next session. And thanks
so
for being on today.
Of course.
When we come back, we'll talk about that big UTC split into 3 companies. How will it affect you? And we welcome your comments right now on social media, Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. I'm on all 3. You can find me there.